Harold, thank you so much for spending the time talking to me today. I really appreciate that. I thought we'd kick this off with the happiness of pursuit. And yes, I actually did flip that on its head there for a second, so park that, I'll come back to it. The pursuit of happiness is what most of us strive for, but you're so happy-go-lucky. You're always laughing and smiling, and your colleagues say the same thing. It seems like perhaps your happiness is within the pursuit of finding the truth in food sciences. Give us a little bit about your backstory from Mars to now here at UC Davis.
Well, yeah, great. It's great to be here, Bryce, and appreciate the opportunity. So I am happy because I get to pursue what I want to do in terms of the difference that I'd like to make in the world, and it is through food science. I was talking about this with a colleague earlier today, but for some reason, when I was 16, 17 years old, it sort of occurred to me that the greatest change that I could have on the world would actually be creating a better food supply. And that would have different impacts. It would make people healthier, improve quality of life, improve the quality of the planetary environment, and so on and so forth. So that was really cool. And I ended up getting a degree in food science. And from that, I started to understand what made food tick, which is actually the molecular composition of food. And so it was the chemistry of food. And as I got further and further into it and figured out, what made food tick and what made the molecules tick, I got happier and happier. And then I started to be able to work with great people, and actually great people are like, atoms in terms of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, so on and so forth. And I started to see that we could impact, making food better by actually creating great teams that worked to make food better. And I just fell in where I was very happy. So happy to be here.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that the way you describe making food tick, or what makes it tick. And ultimately that's, we are what we eat, and that is what makes us tick.
Absolutely.
And throughout this extensive journey in food science, how is it that you've seen the industry evolve, especially as it relates to Chardonnay Marc?
Well, so that's a pretty expansive question. So the industry as a whole, the food industry, has not been evolving as much as it should. And Chardonnay Marc, and the work we're doing, I think has an opportunity to help the food industry evolve. And so what I mean is the food industry, it's a multi-trillion-dollar global sector. And it's what we would call a legacy sector. The modern food industry really has existed for around 150 years, and it's enabled, world population to increase. We have a safe supply of food and an abundant supply of food. But once we sort of got to that point in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, then as a society, we kind of locked in on that, and the industry sector said, great, here's where we are. Of course, now we know that societally we face some existential crises, including improving global health from a human perspective, and also improving environmental sustainability, and therefore creating a healthy planet for healthy humans to live on. And so where this ties to Chardonnay Marc, of course, is that this is, in order to create a new sector that moves beyond the legacy sector where we are, we need to have some disruptors. And so Chardonnay Marc is really one of these rare opportunities to create something new that is exciting and actually can change this legacy sector by being a challenger to the incumbent, so to speak. And I love a challenge, so that's part of what makes me happy as well.
I love it. I heard you on a TED Talk once talk about unlikely collaboration. You've established the team of teams around you here through what might be considered as an unlikely collaboration. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so actually it was uncommon collaboration.
Uncommon, yes.
But unlikely and uncommon certainly,
that's right.
certainly fit, right? And so what I mean by that is that there's a kind of a phrase that people use whenever they're dealing with a situation, and either you're dealing with the usual suspects or you're not. And so part of the food industry is that, it's a legacy sector, as I mentioned, and so when you're working in the food sector, you find yourself dealing with the usual suspects, and that includes companies, that includes universities, that includes government agencies, and so on and so forth. And so it dawned on me in 2010, 2011, which is when I gave that TED talk, that if we were actually going to change this sector, we were going to have to create uncommon collaborations. So collaborations between not the usual suspects, but the unusual suspects. And so that's where that came from, and that's sort of the ecosystem that we've been building.
And it seems like you've drawn that team of teams around you, and it seems like, you guys all share this common goal, as you put it, what makes food tick. And in this case, as it pertains to the elusive, and maybe not so much elusive anymore, Chardonnay mark. Let's talk about that for a second, because for a long time I think we've been seeing red. And by that I mean the French paradox, as we all understand this to be this understanding that, red wine may offset a lot of the heavier, fattier foods that the French enjoy. But tell us why that might not be as much of the case as we once thought, that maybe we should sort of shift our lens over to this white Chardonnay varietal.
I think there definitely was a core of a key truth in the French paradox and the research that came out of that. And really what the core truth was is that, hey, they're, back to the usual suspects and unusual suspects. It was an unusual suspect that wine could play a role in good health. And obviously that was where the paradox part came from. And then, there was the association with red wine, and I think honestly it's because people like colors, and they saw something red and it's like, whoop, there go my eyes, I'm going to go to where the color is. And so then there were sort of reasons that were almost made up for why this French paradox could exist. But there is a core of truth to it, and the core of truth is that you have complex substances, and wine is a complex substance that comes from an even more complex substance, which are the wine grapes, right? And so this is where the Chardonnay paradox, which we like to call this, started to emerge, because if you think about actually the winemaking process and where the complexity actually resides, the most complex place where it can reside in this whole wine and grape sort of environment is in the grape itself. And if we think about the winemaking process, Chardonnay wine is made with the least disruption to the most complex material, which is that wine grape. Whereas making red wine actually removes more of the complexity from the grape and transfers it into the wine. And so what became very clear, the paradox is that the most complex health potential was actually in the Chardonnay grape during the winemaking process versus the red wine grape.
That is super interesting. So I draw this parallel, you're going to correct me if I'm wrong. So I want to talk to you a little bit about stress, but not in context of human stress. And not all stress is bad, and that's really the underpinning of this misconception around stress, both mental, emotional, and physical. But by talking about stress and refocusing on the Chardonnay, Coastal Chardonnay grape varietal, from which we're describing, and the extract, as you most eloquently described, the pomace, or otherwise known as the mark.
Yep.
This story really starts off as this grape, particularly itself, enduring some environmental stressors, right? And as we now understand, some might be what makes this grape tick, to borrow from your language. So just give us that, if you agree, that whole parallel as to how we might be looking at a grape that endures perhaps even more stress than its red varietal cousin, so as to end up as something even more nutritious for us to consume.
Well, so you're making me smile because you're making me happy, because I'm thinking of how great cool Coastal Chardonnay wines taste to start with. Right. But and the reason for that is because of the stresses. And so, but stress can be a very, very positive factor. So think about even from vascular biology and cardiovascular health. It turns out that without something called shear stress in blood moving through the blood vessel, you wouldn't get a release of nitric oxide, right, which is what triggers this wonderful cascade of vascular elasticity and relaxation that contributes to good cardiovascular health. So that's an example of good stress. Uncommon collaboration between different departments at a university and different universities and companies and so on and so forth. a really good relationship has some stress involved. So you want people debating and arguing and all that sort of thing. And so stress definitely can be a very positive factor in lots of different things. And that certainly is true when it comes to agriculture. The products that come from agriculture, such as viticulture, is generally speaking, the more stress that's involved, as long as it's positive, stress in the right sort of zone, the zone of positive stress, let's call it, what that ends up doing is it induces the plant to want to produce more things that address that stress. And of course, those molecules that the plant produces are things that add complexity for flavor, they add complexity for health potential interactions with our physiology, and so on and so forth. And so Coastal Chardonnay, grown in California, which if you've ever been up on the North Coast or Central Coast of California, it's beautiful. But, I tell you what, I challenge you to go hang out for a week with,
Also some harsh conditions
yeah,
up there.
It's pretty harsh. It can be stressful, but it's a beautiful stress. And of course, we can, walk away and go to our campers or our houses or whatever. Those vines cannot, right? And so they're there. So they have to figure out a way to deal with that stress. And the way they deal with that stress is that they produce a more complex array of metabolites or chemistries in their vines. And that's what creates this wonderful, complex mixture that we work with from the Chardonnay mark and WellVine perspective. And I don't think that's necessarily different for the red wine varietals. I think where we get to, though, is back to where I started, which is when you're making the wine, we get to retain more of the complexity in the grape and therefore the Chardonnay mark because of that winemaking process. So same amount of stress, can't say that the red is less stressed than the white. However, we get to keep more of that positive stress in our Chardonnay WellVine mark than a comparable red wine, producer would.
Gotcha. The microbiome, medical buzz term of the day for a good reason. But in context of gut, brain, and even heart axis, we're sort of understanding of this interconnectivity. How is this Coastal Chardonnay mark improving folks' connectivity, if you will, or each of these separately and together, if you could comment on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I think there's two great frontiers in human physiology and health. So one is the neurological frontier and our brains, how they work and so on and so forth. And the other is our gut health or gastrointestinal tract. And so the complexity in both of these physiological regions is amazing. Turns out that they're probably inextricably and deeply linked. So the gut-brain axis, as we often say. But when you think about the brain, you have a lot of neurons, up there that are super complex. In our gut, we have trillions of microbes that are actually interacting with all the complexity of our gut cells that are already quite complex. And there's actually neurons in our gut that are linking to our brain and so on and so forth. And so, what we see in terms of the gut is a highly complex environment that is systemically connected to the rest of our body and therefore drivers of our total health. And so what that complexity needs to interact with is an equally sort of complex substrate, which obviously comes through our mouth. And cool Coastal Chardonnay derived mark actually provides the maximum complexity from one of history's great, most revered food products. And there's probably a good reason for why grapes have been around for so long, because they feed the complexity of our gut health in a way that actually helps feed us and nourish us in the way that we need to be. And so to get very specific, and what we're finding here with our research, with our team of teams at UC Davis, and University of Tennessee, and so on and so forth, is that indeed, and this is more specific to the Chardonnay mark, is that we have this very complex array of polyphenols. There's thousands and thousands of polyphenols, we know that, and it turns out that grapes have a really wide diversity of those to begin with. And then when you stress them on the coast, as we do with our cool Chardonnay, then you get even more of those. And then also these fibers called oligosaccharides, which are an amazing complex natural products chemistry family that has been emerging during the last 20 years in terms of feeding our immune systems better. We call those prebiotic fibers. And so when you bring those together, this complex array of oligosaccharides, this complex array of polyphenols, there's complex interactions with these trillions of microbes that actually feed, shape, and nourish those communities in our gut so that we get the right systemic effects for better health in our bodies.
And I'm still feeling like I've got a happy gut with a happy microbiome after we together shared a wonderful wine tasting paired with this incredible chocolate. So this Chardonnay mark, and this is what folks at home want to know, is now ending up in consumable products called WellVine, showing up in incredible chocolate, pairing so beautifully with all types of different wine. But we sipped on some Chardonnay and enjoyed this chocolate. This stuff has therapeutic, if you will, or payload dose for health conferring benefits in it. Explain for folks at home how they can now find this sort of healthier, better chocolate that's kind of available because of this Chardonnay mark powder that they're infusing.
Well, so one of the really happy discoveries, and this is part of why we feel really excited about the potential for the Chardonnay mark to be a disruptor for the legacy food industry, is honestly, chocolate, which is an amazing thing, derived from cocoa, which is also an amazing thing. These are wonderful substances that have been around as foods for quite a while, and the legacy food industry, there's a big chocolate industry out there, right? There isn't, to my knowledge, a big Chardonnay mark industry or wine grape mark industry out there.
Yes.
So this is a classic example of where a really promising challenger can disrupt a legacy sector. But a lot of things have to work out for that to happen. And here's the things that need to work out. One is there needs to be reasons why people would want those two worlds to come together. And it turns out there is a reason, and those are called taste, and better health. And to our surprise, Chardonnay mark actually makes chocolate taste better. This came from some experimentation with a wonderful chocolatier named Ralph Jerome. And so he started experimenting with could chocolate be a carrier for large amounts of Chardonnay mark so that we would get the health benefits but not have any adverse taste consequences. And much to our surprise, and this is definitely the eureka moment, as Ralph started to do this work, we started to realize that, hey, we got something special here, unique, honestly, which is for the first time that I've been aware of it, we actually made chocolate taste better. So not only did we make it healthier, but we made it tastier. And so that's where the vine, obviously, where the grape, Chardonnay grapes come from, and the bar, classic representation of legacy industry, they collide. And so it's kind of a really neat representation of a challenger that is inspirational, challenging the legacy sector. And we think it's going to reinvent that sector.
I think it will too, fueled by that trifecta. That's amazing. So let's come full circle, in your pursuit of happiness, but also happiness in that pursuit. Where do you hope things go next within the realm of research?
One, I hope that we continue to peel back the layers. So what we want to do, and this is a really important point, not in a reductionist way. So the legacy food sector has honestly borrowed a lot from the legacy pharmaceutical sector, which is, if something's interesting, what we need to do is take a reductionist approach and, simplify until we get to these single, purified things and say, oh, that's it. And really what the food sector needs to do is embrace the natural complexity that's present in the plant kingdom, for example, and actually figure out ways not to reduce that, but to embrace that complexity and actually complexify our food supply so that it works better with these complex health systems that I was talking about. So number one is, I want us to continue to embrace that complexity and understand what it can do from a health and taste and delight, consumer delight. That's what it's all about. How do we delight more people so that they consume these wonderful things that we're making and choose those versus the legacy stuff, right? So that's number one. I hope we continue to understand that complexity. And then number two is I hope we figure out more and more applications. So chocolate was a great first start. Surprising start, great first start. And now what we need to do, though, to really change the world is we need to get more of this stuff into more people's mouths. And the way to do that is to get the Chardonnay mark into more products going forward.
Right. Listen, I appreciate all that you do from the scientific research background perspective in making us all happier and healthier in the process, for sure. Thanks so much for spending the time, Harold. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Thank
Cheers.
you.